I call Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And it is a very great pleasure, actually, to stand and speak on the Shop Trading Hours Amendment Bill at its first reading because, Mr Speaker, this is one of those rare moments where my Catholic upbringing and my trade union principles absolutely intercept and guide my conscience, because my party is allowing me to use my conscience to cast a conscience vote on this bill. And I am very confused, I think Melissa Lee's very confused actually, because she seemed to be in front of this House telling us that the National Party actually have a free conscience vote on this. Is that correct? So they are. So this means that the National Party have flip-flopped again, because Melissa Lee tells us that they are now going to be doing a conscience vote on this issue. That's what she's just clarified for us. So that's great, because I think that's what we've been calling for. We've been calling for the National Party to truly make this a conscience issue so that we can test the conscience of the Parliament on this. Because now that I know that, now that Melissa Lee has clarified that issue for us, that means that this bill is unlikely to proceed past its first reading, because I know that there are a number of government MPs who will use their conscience to vote against this bill. They will use their conscience to vote against this bill if they are not whipped into doing otherwise. So we know that Bill English has a track history of voting against measures that take Easter Sunday away from working people. We know that Jerry Brownlee has a track record of voting against bills that take Easter Sunday away from working people. Nick Smith is another one, as is Chester Burrows, who I can now speak about. He is another person who has regularly voted against these measures, so he'll be able to use his conscience to vote against it again, won't he? I'm not so sure now that Melissa Lee's not here to answer. They seem not so sure about it anymore. They're now starting to scratch their heads. But here's the really interesting one.
Point of order. The Honourable Maggie Petty.
The tradition continues. I think that members who are not present in the House do not have that drawn to.
Order. We're dealing with a point of order. Order. Dealing with a point of order. That's not a point. Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. But here's the really interesting one. Tim McIndoe. He is the whip. He has voted against these measures to take Easter Sunday from working people on 2 occasions since he's been in Parliament. And yet, he is now going to be the whip requiring all of those other MPs I just talked about to vote against their conscience. How ironic is that? How ironic. And I think the church-going people of Hamilton will have some questions for their local MP, Tim McIndoe, if he exercises the whip in a way that forces himself and other MPs who don't agree with this piece of legislation to actually vote against it. But now Chris Bishop's looking really confused. He's not sure whether it's a conscience vote or whether it's not. So can we have some clarification, please, from the whip in the chair at the moment, Joanne Hayes? Is it a conscience vote or not for the National Party? They seem really unclear about that, and by the end of this debate, because there's no answer, I would like that to be clarified. But Mr Speaker, I want to put on record my conscience vote, because it will be recorded in opposition to this legislation, because what both my Catholic upbringing and my trade union principles tell me is that the economy is here to work for people. The economy is here to work for people, not the other way around. And that's where the national government have got this so badly wrong. And they've introduced this on Melbourne Cup Day. And the reason why I want to refer to that is not just because I like to say Melbourne Cup Day rather a lot, but because actually that's the race that stops a nation. Why do they call it the race that stops a nation? Because it's a public holiday in Victoria, and they celebrate that. They don't quiver in their boots about it and get frightened about it and run and hide about it. they proudly say this is the race that stops a nation because people have the day off. And they have the day off to celebrate and go to events together. And the Minister, Michael Woodhouse, talked before about the events that happen over Easter. He talked about them as if they are reasons why we have to have shops open. Actually, those events are the reasons why we should not have shops open and why those workers should be free to go to the Easter tournaments. Those workers should be free to accompany their family to family gatherings, to go with their families to family gatherings. Those workers should be free if they choose to go and celebrate Mass on Easter Sunday. These are the events that happen on Easter that make it important that working people have the right to actually go and participate in those events. What is it that this national government has got against families? Because this is another piece of legislation where they are voting, I think in a whipped manner. Melissa Lee seemed a bit confused about that, but they are voting against families having this. And what is the harm? What is the harm of families being able to actually get together over Easter? In my family, traditionally, because my children are involved in basketball, it has become the weekend that we do the basketball Easter tournament because it's always on Easter. Easter tournament is a big thing in my family. And the ability for me as a parent, and for me as a parent, if I happen to be working in a shop, to actually accompany my children and be courtside while they played their Easter tournament in basketball every year is something that I want other families to have the ability to do also. Because those are the sorts of things that happen over Easter. There are not many of these days. In fact, I think there's about 3 of them. 3.5 days every year where shops are not able to open. Is that too much to ask? Is that too much to ask? Because this is the green space that is put aside for family time. And yes, there is, for many people, a religious component to this. This is about prioritising the things that are important to New Zealanders. But that national government can't stand it. They cannot stand for people to be able to prioritise their families, their religious events, whatever occasion they choose to actually use a long weekend to celebrate together. That national government's got to take it away from them. Mr. Speaker, before the contribution from Melissa Lee, which I think was a confused contribution, almost as confused as this legislation is, by the way, she talked about that they wanted to stop certain voting behaviours over Easter Sunday trading. Well, what are those voting behaviours that she wants to stop? Are they the voting behaviours of Bill English, Jerry Brownlee, Nick Smith, Chester Burrows, Chris Finlayson on the odd occasion, Michael Woodhouse, the Minister himself, Alfred Naro, Tim McIndoe and Sam Lotto Inga? Are those the strange voting behaviours she wants to stop? Because they are national MPs who, if left to their own conscience, been allowed to actually exercise that, would vote against this bill, and I would encourage them to do so. I would particularly put the challenge out to Tim McIndoe, out to him to stand on his principles and not allow his colleagues to require him to force everyone else into voting against a piece of legislation he doesn't even agree with, by his former voting record, if that means anything at all. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to be here standing to say that I will use my conscience to vote against this bill. It is anti-worker, it is anti-family, it is all those things that the national government are known for, and it doesn't take New Zealand forward. Certainly doesn't fix the 150,000 jobs that they are losing in the economy as we speak. It doesn't address any of those issues. What it does is make a shambles out of industrial legislation, and it puts it onto local government and they don't want this responsibility.
I call Brett.